So, John, Trump and MAGA have made Canadian political elections pretty topsy-turvy. I think everyone felt like there was a pretty strong direction, and that's been turned on its head now. The latest from the land to our north is the selection of a new prime minister. Technically, a new prime minister, for all intents and purposes, a new Liberal Party leader officially. Canadians being uniquely Canadian, those two things come hand in hand. He'll be prime minister for a few months before a general election, and then we'll see what the Canadian voting public has to say about it. But it seems like a bit of a departure, Mark Carney, from the Trudeau administration. John, what do you think?
Well, what strikes me as crazy is like 2 months ago, the Liberal Party in Canada was just dead. It was gone. It was out. It was out of leadership. There was no chance for it to come back. It was polling really, really low. And then you see the Trump tariffs hit, and it just hockey sticks up. And yes, that's a cultural reference to Canada, the land of maple syrup. But yeah, I don't know of any way to explain it except that we thought we saw a MAGA-like movement happening in Canada with their Conservative Party. Their Pierre, I forget his last name, was he was talking about how echoing a lot of things that Trump was echoing about the media, deep state, all of these things. And then boom, the narrative shifted in Canada, did a 180 overnight over Trump's tariffs, and the Liberal Party is just back on top on the polls. And I don't really know what to think about it. I'm not as familiar with Canadian politics as I probably should be, but I think that I think throughout the Western world we're going to see this happening. I mean, even in Europe, we're seeing shockwaves about Trump. Pax Americana is dying, and Europe is waking up, saying, "Oh, we've got to defend ourselves. We can't rely on America anymore." And we're going to see a lot of repercussions throughout European politics as well. I think that this is only the beginning. I think countries are going to wake up and go, "Oh, we've got to handle things ourselves." And I think a kind of a nationalist, they're going to have their own nationalist movements of their own. And I think that can go in a bunch of different ways. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if we're not seeing a break in the wave of sort of right-wing populist movements across the Western Hemisphere and Europe, because Trump is certainly the Trump regime has been a cautionary tale, right? And the impact on Canadian politics, as I read it, and I'm admittedly not as big a follower of Canadian politics as of U.S. politics and other things, but it seems to me very much like seeing what a disaster right-wing populism is. I mean a fast-moving disaster here in the United States. Like there is not a wait and see here. There is not a let's see how this pans out. There's not a let's take some time.
Burn it down, and hope for the best.
It is a rolling, moving, rapidly developing train wreck here in the U.S. Because these people who candidly don't know what they're doing barge in and start pulling plugs out of the walls because damn anybody with expertise, those are the enemy, right? And so it's break everything quickly. It's not the old Silicon Valley ethos of move fast and break things. This is just breaking things for the sake of breaking things and then hoping the innovation follows. I don't think hope is a viable political strategy. I know hope is not a viable economic policy. And I think the rest of the world is going to school on the U.S. I don't like being the country that the rest of the world goes to school on, but I do think that it's occurring, and you see it you see it in Canada.
I called it kind of a nationalist movement in Europe, but it's really not. It's more of like a regionalist movement, if I will, right? Canada and Europe have kind of like got this mindset of, oh, we're it now. We're together now. There's not just it's not just like Poland saying, oh, Poland for Poland. It's France saying, oh no, we're for all of Europe now. And even Germany, who was just a few years ago very hesitant about aid to Ukraine, is now fully down that road. I mean, Sweden has even talked about NATO, and Finland and the Nordic countries who have typically stayed out of these conflicts are fully on board with the defense of Ukraine, because they've got Russia right on their border, and they know what a defeat for Ukraine looks like for Europe, and it's not good.
I mean, it's can I say a dirty word? Can I say that it's globalism?
Yeah.
Right? It certainly is cosmopolitanism. Those are the natural counterbalances, the natural counterweights to populist movements. Are people saying, no, 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 wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Like we want to engage with the world. We want to have a sophisticated understanding of foreign affairs. We want to understand this big multilateral framework where nations and societies can interact positively and coalesce and build strong institutions that cross national borders and work together. You see, there's going to be a race in Canadian politics to define Mark Carney, right? Because I think even Canadian political commentators are like kind of understand who this is. He's not somebody who's come up through a long political career. Who's the head of the Bank of Canada. Then he left to be head of the Bank of England. Spent some time in Europe. Bounced around the U.S. a little bit. Bounced back to Canada. He is a guy who has a valid passport, if I have ever seen one. And there's going to be a race, I think, both positively and negatively to define who he is as Canada's election campaign moves forward. But one thing is certain: it's that he is a very big contrast to these populist, nationalist, right wing, sort of conservative populism movements that have not just seemed to have taken root in the Anglosphere, but in Europe as well. And it's nice to see a counterbalance to that. I hate that counterbalance seems to be motivated by our suffering here in the United States, but we are suffering and suffering bigly, as a fella might say. And I'm glad to see other people, at least the example's not going to waste.
I really wonder if history isn't going to look back on this time period as they look back on Japanese admiral saying that they have awoken the sleeping giant of America after Pearl Harbor. I almost wonder if Putin and Russian historians will look back on this moment as saying, "Oh, we woke the European sleeping giant," because for a long time they were not interested in foreign engagements around the world as much. The U.S. very much more adventurous, to say the least, in that regard, and has dragged European countries along on a few occasions. But I do think that we're going to see a moment here, a European moment, where Europe takes the stage as a superpower. Um, it's going to be really fascinating at that level, and again on how regional elections turn out, because we for a long time Macron in France was thought to be DOA, and his career has certainly seems like it's done a 180. He's definitely kind of the spokesman. He's the leader of the free world, is what I think you kind of have to call him that now, don't you? I mean, who else would it be? I mean, the new prime minister from Germany certainly is speaking out, but he doesn't have the name recognition and the stamina that Macron seems to have built up right now. Like who else speaks for the Western world but Macron? And I can't think of another name.
Yeah, well, I mean, on security issues, I know Tusk in Poland has been out front. Like, I want to give Europe credit for Europe.
Yeah.
Europe is not a French invention. Europe is a European movement. It's peoples all across Europe coming together, and with a few exceptions, I do think that there is a European moment like you're talking about now. I think the unfortunate flip side of that coin is there's a very good chance, I think, that historians look back at this moment and mark it as the beginning of the end for American hegemony on the world stage. And I know I'm old enough to remember a Republican Party that used to get very upset at the assertion that the world should have more than one superpower. And now it seems like
Inevitable.
Trump is creating a world where not only does it seem inevitable that there will be more than one superpower, it's questionable whether America will be a superpower in that list. The isolation from the world, which we're seeing not just through autarkic trade policy, but through diplomacy that's alienating of everybody except for the worst actors on the world stage. It's not going to be good for an America that has built its strength on engagement, on trade. We are largely a mercantile power. We span the North American continent from east to west. We're not a land power. We're a naval power. So if you want to think of us in the context of sort of like the allegory of the British Empire, It's not to say that America ceases to exist, but we rely so much for our strength on the connections that we bring into the world that to turtle into a shell really does roll back 150 years of American progress, and it can do it with surprising rapidity. I hope that we start to see a shining example from the rest of the world and America decides to follow course. Under this administration, that's not going to happen in the immediate term.
America, if it hasn't lost its military military strength and its place in the world militarily, it's certainly lost its place morally as the voice of liberty in the world. I think that that's something that it has held for a long time, and it's held in many cases. It's made many mistakes in that pursuit and in that leadership. I'm not going to say that it hasn't made those mistakes. It has, but I think that we are going to look back on this time period as the day that America lost its ability to call the world into action when it needed to. Because, for example, on September 11th, when we were attacked, the entire world reacted and supported and came behind the United States. And if that happened again today, I don't know that would happen. Because you know what, it's good to have allies in those times when the world is turned on its head and something like that happens. It's good to have those allies, and I hope that I don't see another day like that anytime soon, because I don't know how the world would react right now.
Sure.
So.
I think I would caution against this idea of thinking about American strength in terms of military strength. Obviously, we're the predominant military power on Earth. We can fight 2 major wars at once, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? We've all seen the defense studies. We know how much budget we put into it. But that's sort of part of the problem, is how much budget we put into it. The United States has a very resource-intensive 20th century way of thinking about fighting war. And if we've learned anything in Ukraine, it's that a $200 drone can do a lot of business.
Multi-million-dollar tank out.
A multi-million-dollar tank. We have a tremendously resource inefficient commitment to maintaining the military hegemony that we have, and we can support that on the back of a world-class, insanely booming GDP, an economy that is a powerhouse, diplomatic and trade connections with the rest of the world, an international framework of alliances, an international framework of law in which we can operate, in which American companies can go out and operate in countries all over the world. That's the strength that buttresses this sort of really expensive way of projecting military might. If that strength goes, then yeah, I mean, you've got a generation where you still have a whole bunch of this really expensive kit that is best of breed sitting around that America can use to project power, but without the ability to either evolve into a more efficient 21st century type of warfare, and decaying empires are not known for being innovative. Or to maintain the status quo of this really high level of defense spending. If you're asking are we looking at a 21st century that ends the same way it began, with America as a hegemonic, virtually unchallengeable military and economic power, I think Trump has put that on very, very dangerous footing.
I think I'll end this discussion on this note, that the very people who talk about the decline of the West seem to be the ones most intent on causing it.